Jake's summer afternoons had always been a sanctuary. Golden sunlight shimmering over his freshly renovated pool, the cool water inviting on a scorching day. His backyard was a quiet oasis, nestled in the tidy rows of maple trees and manicured lawns that defined the neighborhood governed by the Crestwood HOA. For Jake, the pool wasn't just a luxury, it was a refuge after long days at work, and a place where his young daughter could splash and laugh safely. But that fragile peace shattered the moment he found the letter. It was pinned to his front door, a crisp envelope stamped with the Crestwood HOA logo. Jake's name was typed neatly on the front, but the tone inside was anything but friendly. As he unfolded the letter, the sharp words struck him like a sudden chill. "Dear Mr. Thompson," it began, "it has come to the HOA board's attention that the water quality in your backyard pool falls below the community's established safety standards. Several residents have expressed concern over the pool's murky appearance and potential health risks. Immediate action is required." Jake's brow furrowed. Murky? Health risks? His pool water was crystal clear. He prided himself on maintaining it meticulously, weekly treatments, professional cleanings, and constant monitoring. He'd even kept detailed records. The letter continued, but what made Jake's stomach twist wasn't the complaint itself. It was the signature at the bottom: Karen Delaney, HOA board member and self-appointed guardian of community standards. Karen was infamous for her strict no-exceptions attitude, a woman who wielded HOA rules like a weapon, often turning minor infractions into full-blown disputes. Jake had clashed with her before, mostly over landscaping rules and mailboxes, but this complaint about his pool felt different, more pointed, personal. As he reread the letter, Jake noticed something unsettling. The phrase, "several residents," seemed vague, almost suspicious. Who had actually complained, and why now? It felt like Karen had been waiting for a chance to strike. Later that day, Jake sat on his porch, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows over the neighborhood. Across the street, Karen's house gleamed spotless, her windows reflecting the fading light. He watched as she paced her front yard, phone pressed to her ear, her expression hard and focused. Jake's neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez, waved from her porch. "I heard about the letter, Jake. Karen's been on a rampage lately. She's been complaining about everything. Trash cans left out too long, kids playing too loud. It's like she wants to make life miserable for everyone." Jake nodded grimly. This feels different. Like there's more to it than just rules. That night, Jake's mind raced. Was Karen targeting him for something else? He couldn't think of a reason why. He was quiet, respectful of the community. Yet, the sense of being watched crept over him like a shadow. As darkness settled, he stepped outside to check the pool. The water glistened peacefully under the moonlight, every ripple catching the silvery glow. It was perfect, untouched. Still, Jake's instincts whispered caution. In a neighborhood ruled by petty grievances and strict bylaws, the slightest misstep could ignite a firestorm, and Karen was known for fanning the flames. The next morning, Jake called the pool company for a full water analysis, hoping to end the matter quickly. But deep down, he knew this complaint was only the beginning, because in Crestwood, where every lawn was measured and every rule enforced, sometimes the smallest ripple could become a tidal wave, and Jake was about to find out just how dangerous that wave could be. Jake stared at the pristine test results on his laptop screen, disbelief swirling in his chest. The lab's report was unequivocal. His pool water was perfectly balanced, crystal clear, and free of any contaminants. The pH level was spot on, chlorine concentration ideal, and no trace of algae or bacteria. Everything matched the highest standards. Yet, Karen's complaint hung over him like a dark cloud, persistent and unyielding. He replayed her last words in his mind from the HOA phone call earlier that day. I'm afraid we've uncovered new evidence, Jake. Something irrefutable. We will be conducting another inspection. You won't be able to ignore this. Jake's gut twisted. What evidence? And why was Karen so determined to escalate this? Determined to protect his home and reputation, Jake began combing through his neighborhood, quietly asking questions. But the residents he spoke with were evasive. Some avoided his gaze, others changed the subject. A few mentioned hushed conversations and suspicious meetings, but no one would say anything outright. Karen's been digging into everyone's business lately, Mrs. Ramirez confided over the fence. She's obsessed with control. But this feels different. Like she's trying to pin something on you. Jake's nights grew restless. He set up extra cameras around his property, watching the footage frame by frame for any sign of trouble. Every shadow, every movement was scrutinized. But nothing out of the ordinary appeared. Only the usual neighborhood quiet, the rustling of leaves, the distant barking of dogs. One night around midnight, Jake spotted a flicker on the security feed, someone outside his backyard, just beyond the fence. The figure moved quickly, avoiding the camera's view. His heart hammered. Could it be Karen? The next day, Jake requested the HOA's formal inspection date, trying to prepare himself. Karen had scheduled it for the following week, promising the evidence would finally put an end to the dispute. Jake had no idea what to expect, but he knew he had to stay vigilant. On the morning of the inspection, the air felt heavy with anticipation. Jake greeted the inspector, a middle-aged man with a clipboard, polite but terse. As they walked around the pool, the inspector took water samples, checked the filtration system, and measured chemical levels. Jake answered every question calmly, showing receipts for the recent treatments and maintenance, but Karen arrived unannounced just as the inspector finished. Her eyes narrowed as she surveyed the pool, arms crossed tightly. She began pointing out irregularities no one else could see. A slight discoloration here, a trace of residue there. She spoke with conviction, a hunter closing in on prey. Jake's frustration simmered beneath his calm exterior. He caught Karen's gaze and saw something more than concern. It was a cold, calculating determination, as if the pool was just a weapon in a larger battle. After the inspection, Karen lingered near the fence, her phone pressed to her ear. Jake overheard snippets of her conversation, words like investigation, pressure, and remove him. It was clear she wasn't just enforcing rules. She was waging war. That night, Jake lay awake, wondering what Karen hoped to gain. Was it power, revenge, or something darker? The peaceful neighborhood was no longer a safe haven. It had become a chessboard, and Jake was a target. But Jake wasn't about to back down. He knew the truth was on his side, and no matter how deep Karen's schemes ran, he would find a way to expose them. As the moon cast long shadows across his backyard, Jake vowed this fight was only beginning. And he would. Be ready when Karen made her next move. Jake's nerves were frayed like worn rope, stretched thin by the relentless pressure from Karen and the looming inspection. Every creak in the house, every rustle outside, set his heart racing. He'd barely slept the last few nights, eyes flicking to the security monitor whenever he woke, convinced he'd catch Karen or someone else lurking near his property. It was just past midnight when the moment came. The screen blinked alive with grainy footage of the backyard. Jake's pulse quickened as a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, moving cautiously near the pool's edge. The flickering motion of a flashlight sliced through the blackness, scanning the water's surface and the surrounding deck. The figure's movements were slow, deliberate, almost practiced. Jake leaned closer, straining to make out the shape. The hood obscured the face, but something about the gait, the rigid posture, felt chillingly familiar. Then, as the figure turned briefly toward the camera, a flash of harsh moonlight revealed a distinctive glint, an HOA badge pinned to the jacket. Karen. For a moment, Jake was frozen in disbelief. Why was she prowling his backyard in the dead of night? What could she possibly be looking for or trying to prove that the daytime inspections hadn't revealed? He debated his next move. Should he confront her directly? Call the police? His gut screamed caution. Karen was dangerous when cornered, and this was trespassing, clear and simple. Jake quietly slipped on his shoes, grabbed his phone, and tiptoed outside. The cool night air felt sharp against his skin as he crept toward the back gate. He stayed in the shadows, heart hammering, listening for any sound beyond the soft lapping of pool water. Suddenly, the figure froze, flashlight beam sweeping toward the fence. Jake ducked behind a bush just as Karen stepped closer, kneeling to inspect something near the gate's lock. She pulled out a small toolkit and began working on the latch. Jake's breath caught. This wasn't some innocent inspection. Karen was breaking in. He pressed his phone's emergency call button, whispering for help. The seconds dragged endlessly as Karen's tools clicked and scraped, the lock giving way with a quiet snap. The gate creaked open, and Karen slipped inside, disappearing behind the pool house. Jake stayed hidden but kept recording on his phone, capturing everything. This was proof, irrefutable evidence of Karen's true intentions. But then, something unexpected happened. From the darkness behind the fence, Jake heard a faint noise, a soft rustling, hurried footsteps. His neighbor, Mr. Lee, appeared, flashlight raised. "Jake, what's going on?" Jake quickly explained, showing him the live video feed. Together they waited in tense silence, eyes glued to the security monitor. Minutes later, Karen emerged from the pool house, glancing nervously around. She was holding a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. Her expression was unreadable, calm but with a flicker of desperation. Before she could leave, Mr. Lee stepped forward. "Karen, what are you doing on Jake's property?" Caught off. "Guard?" Karen hesitated, then snapped, "I'm doing what's necessary to protect this community." Jake's phone buzzed. Police were en route. Karen's calm facade cracked. She dropped the vial and bolted toward the fence. Jake and Mr. Lee tried to follow, but Karen disappeared into the night. As sirens wailed in the distance, Jake's mind raced. What was in that vial? Why risk breaking in and stealing something from his pool? And how deep did Karen's obsession really go? The neighborhood that once felt safe was unraveling, thread by thread, and Jake was trapped in the middle of a mystery that threatened to consume them all. The sirens sliced through the night, their flashing blue and red lights painting long streaks across Jake's quiet street. The familiar calm of Crestwood was shattered, replaced by a charged atmosphere that felt heavy with danger. As the police cruised into his driveway, Jake's heart pounded, not just from relief, but from the lingering dread of what had just happened. Inside, Officer Martinez took notes as Jake recounted the events. He showed the security footage on his phone, the unmistakable image of Karen creeping around the fence, tools in hand, then slipping inside the gate. The officer's eyes darkened as he listened. "Breaking and entering is serious," Martinez said grimly, "especially when it's someone from the HOA. We'll need to bring her in for questioning." Outside, the neighborhood had gathered in small clusters, whispers echoing like ghostly murmurs in the night air. Faces Jake recognized, some shocked, others wary. Karen's reputation as a relentless enforcer of HOA rules had made her many enemies, but this was crossing a line. An hour later, Karen was led out of her house in handcuffs, her face pale but defiant. She refused to meet Jake's eyes as officers read her rights. A crowd of neighbors watched silently, some exchanging knowing glances, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Jake stood frozen for a moment, trying to process the surreal scene. The woman who had harassed him over his pool, who had lodged baseless complaints, was now caught breaking the law herself. But the questions swirling in Jake's mind refused to settle. Why had Karen broken in? What had she been searching for so desperately that she risked arrest? And what was in that vial she'd dropped, the one Jake hadn't dared touch? The police wouldn't say much, only that Karen claimed she was acting in the community's interest, but her story was shaky at best. Days passed in a blur of phone calls, HOA meetings, and whispered gossip. The neighborhood was split. Some rallied behind Jake, calling for stricter HOA oversight. Others clung to the idea that Karen had lost her way, but still believed in her intentions. Jake spent long hours reviewing his security footage, hoping to find clues. Then, late one evening, he noticed something strange. Faint footprints near the pool filter, almost as if someone had been tampering with the system. The footprints led to the side gate, the one Karen had entered through. His blood ran cold. Could Karen have been trying to sabotage his pool? Or worse, was she collecting evidence of something illegal to use against him? Determined to uncover the truth, Jake enlisted the help of his neighbor, Mr. Lee, who had experience in IT and security. Together, they upgraded the cameras and added sensors around the property, setting traps to catch any future intrusions. Meanwhile, the HOA board convened an emergency meeting. The atmosphere was tense, thick with accusations and uneasy silence. Some board members expressed embarrassment, others anger, especially as Karen's pattern of bullying neighbors surfaced. A leaked email revealed Karen had pressured other HOA members to find reasons to penalize Jake. It seemed her vendetta was personal, rooted in an old dispute no one had spoken about. As the board debated Karen's fate, Jake received an anonymous message on his phone. "You don't know the half of it. Be careful who you trust." His pulse quickened. The mystery was deeper than he'd imagined, and the stakes were climbing. That night, Jake sat by his pool, the water reflecting moonlight like a shimmering mirror. His sanctuary felt tainted now, a battleground for secrets and lies. But Jake was no stranger to fights. He vowed to protect his home, his family, and the truth, no matter how dark the waters beneath might be. The police station was cold and sterile, a far cry from the sunlit streets of Crestwood. Jake sat rigid in the interview room, eyes locked on the one-way mirror. Behind it, Karen Delaney sat with her arms crossed, a tight, almost forced calm, plastered on her face. But Jake could see through the cracks in her facade, frustration, fear, and something darker simmering beneath. Detective Harris, a seasoned investigator with a sharp gaze, leaned forward. "Karen, we have the security footage, eyewitness accounts, and evidence of breaking and entering. Care to explain why you risked everything to sneak into Jake's backyard at midnight?" Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm protecting the community. That pool was a hazard." Jake bristled but kept silent. The pool was perfect. He had the tests to prove it. Detective Harris pressed further. "The vial you dropped contains a chemical substance. Care to explain that?" Karen's eyes flickered, her composure faltering for the first time. "I was testing the water, looking for contaminants you all refused to find." Jake shook his head in disbelief. "You already had professional tests. This was about something else." The detective exchanged a glance with Jake, then nodded. "Karen, your file shows this isn't your first complaint against Mr. Thompson. There's a pattern here." Under growing pressure, Karen's mask slipped entirely. "I didn't start this over pool water," she spat. "Years ago, Jake made a decision that cost me everything. The HOA board buried it to protect their own. This was never about safety. It's about revenge." Jake's pulse quickened. What was she talking about? Detective Harris continued. "Care to elaborate?" Karen's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "He voted against my family's appeal to build a ramp for my disabled son. That decision ruined us financially. I've been waiting for a chance to make him pay ever since." The room fell silent. Jake's mind raced back to the meeting years. He had indeed voted against that proposal, citing HOA regulations. He hadn't considered the personal fallout. Karen's bitterness had festered into obsession. Detective Harris shook his head. "This vendetta has endangered the community, Ms. Delaney. Breaking and entering harassment, it has to stop." Karen looked at Jake, eyes blazing. "You don't understand what it's like to lose everything because of a bureaucratic decision. I did what I thought was right." Jake swallowed hard, a mix of anger and pity washing over him. The woman who'd harassed him relentlessly was broken beneath the surface. Outside the station, the media had caught wind of the story. Headlines painted Karen as both a villain and a victim, a woman consumed by personal pain who'd crossed the line. Back in Crestwood, the HOA board convened again, this time to address the scandal engulfing them all. Several board members resigned amid allegations of negligence and cover-ups. Mrs. Ramirez, Jake's neighbor, approached him quietly. "You did the right thing, Jake, but be careful. There are still people who won't let this go." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of community politics settle over him like a storm cloud. The neighborhood he'd once trusted was now a battleground of secrets and grudges. As the sun set over Crestwood, Jake sat by his pool, the water reflecting a fractured sky. He realized this fight was far from over. Karen's confession had lifted the veil, but the wounds ran deep, and the fallout would echo through the neighborhood for months to come. But Jake was ready. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a breath, steady and resolute. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on, determined to reclaim his home and peace, because in Crestwood, some masks fall away, but the truth always surfaces. The Crestwood neighborhood felt different after Karen's arrest. The once pristine street seemed shadowed by whispered conversations and lingering glances. Jake's house, the epicenter of the storm, was both a symbol of resistance and a target. Though Karen was behind bars, the battle was far from over. The HOA board was fractured, trust eroded, and old wounds reopened. Jake found himself at the heart of a community reckoning. At the next HOA meeting, the room buzzed with tension. Some neighbors blamed Jake for the upheaval, while others rallied around him, grateful for his courage to stand up to Karen's tyranny. Mrs. Ramirez sat beside him, her eyes sharp and unwavering. "You've got allies, Jake, more than you realize." Jake nodded, appreciating the support. Yet as he scanned the room, he noticed several familiar faces avoiding eye contact, silent reminders that suspicion still lurked. After the meeting, Mr. Lee approached Jake in the parking lot. "I've been looking into Karen's background more deeply," he said quietly. "And there's something else. Her obsession with you wasn't just about the ramp." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Mr. Lee pulled out his phone, swiping to a folder filled with documents and photos. "Look at this. Over the past few months, there have been unusual transactions linked to her name, payments from an unknown source. And some of the people involved are tied to a construction company bidding for a major project in Crestwood." Jake's stomach churned. "Are you saying Karen was working with someone else, using her HOA position to influence bids?" "Exactly. And those chemicals she dropped in your pool? There's evidence they're linked to illegal waste dumping." The revelation hit Jake like a freight train. The pool complaint was never just personal vendetta. It was part of a larger, more dangerous scheme. His sanctuary had been caught in a web of corruption. Jake realized the stakes had escalated far beyond petty neighborhood disputes. Determined to protect his family and the community, Jake and Mr. Lee began digging deeper, collecting evidence, documenting irregularities. They reached out to the local environmental agency, sharing their findings. Meanwhile, whispers about Jake's role in exposing the corruption began to spread, and with it, a growing wave of community support. But with every step forward, the shadows grew darker. Late one evening, as Jake returned home, he noticed his front gate slightly ajar. His heart raced. Inside, the backyard pool was untouched, but a single envelope lay on the deck. Inside the envelope was a note. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Jake's hands trembled, but his resolve only hardened. He wasn't just fighting to clear his name anymore. He was fighting for the soul of Crestwood. The neighborhood might be fractured, but Jake had something stronger now. Allies willing to stand beside him in the face of threats and lies. As the moon rose over his backyard oasis, the water reflected not just light, but the fierce determination burning within him. The next move was his. Jake felt the weight of the threat hanging over him like a storm cloud, but fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. With Mr. Lee's help, he was digging deeper into the tangled web surrounding Karen's vendetta, and what they found shook them to the core. Late one afternoon, Jake and Mr. Lee sat in Jake's home office, poring over a mountain of documents and emails Mr. Lee had uncovered from HOA files and public records. The evidence was mounting: secret meetings, bribes disguised as consulting fees, and forged documents to manipulate HOA votes. "This goes higher than Karen," Mr. Lee said, eyes narrowed. "There's a faction within the HOA that's been working with that construction company, laying groundwork for a massive development project that would overhaul Crestwood. They needed Karen to stir up trouble, get rid of people like you who might resist." Jake clenched his fists. It wasn't just a personal grudge anymore. It was a full-blown conspiracy to seize control of the neighborhood. They decided to confront the HOA board at the upcoming monthly meeting, armed with the evidence. But the deeper they delved, the more dangerous the game became. 2 nights later, Jake's phone buzzed with an anonymous text. "Last warning. Stop or we'll make sure your family pays." The message rattled Jake, but he refused to back down. He shared the threat with his wife, Emma, who gripped his hand firmly. "We're with you, whatever it takes." At the meeting, the room was packed. The atmosphere was electric, neighbors buzzing with anticipation. Jake stepped forward, laying out the evidence piece by piece, his voice steady but fierce. Gasps echoed as the emails, invoices, and meeting notes flashed on the projector. Board members shifted uncomfortably. Some tried to interrupt, but Jake pressed on. "You deserve to know the truth," he said, eyes sweeping the crowd. "This isn't about pool water or petty complaints. It's about a scheme to profit by destroying the community we love." Karen's name came up repeatedly, but the bigger players, the shadowy executives and corrupt board members, were the true culprits. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the projector cut out, plunging the room into darkness. A collective gasp filled the room. Someone shouted, "Power outage!" Jake's heart pounded as emergency lights blinked on, casting eerie shadows. Before he could react, a loud crash came from the back door. The crowd turned to see a masked figure storming in, wielding a metal rod. Panic erupted. People scrambled for exits, but Jake stood his ground, shielded by Mr. Lee and a few brave neighbors. The intruder swung wildly, smashing furniture, shouting threats to silence Jake. Suddenly, the police burst in, responding to a silent alarm triggered earlier. The figure fled into the night, disappearing into the shadows. Neighbors rallied around Jake, shaken but more determined than ever. The attempted intimidation only confirmed what Jake and his allies suspected. The corruption ran deep, and they were hitting nerves. In the days that followed, the local media picked up the story, shining a spotlight on Crestwood's HOA scandal. Investigations were launched, and several board members stepped down amid mounting pressure. Jake knew this was just the beginning of a long fight to reclaim his neighborhood, but for the first time, he felt hope, a community ready to rise against the darkness. As he sat by his pool that evening, watching the water ripple under the moonlight, Jake whispered to himself, "We're not giving up, not now, not ever." The weeks after the attack felt like a whirlwind. Crestwood was no longer the quiet, friendly neighborhood Jake had once known. But in the chaos, a new spirit had emerged. Neighbors banding together, demanding transparency and pushing for change. Jake became a reluctant leader, his home a hub for meetings and plans. Emma stood firmly by his side, a steady anchor amid the storm. The pool, once a symbol of Karen's accusations, had transformed into a gathering spot, a place where neighbors shared ideas and hopes for their future. The HOA board was dissolved, replaced by an interim committee of residents committed to honesty and fairness. The local authorities continued their investigation into the corruption, promising justice. But Jake's mind remained restless. Something didn't sit right. The night before the committee's first official meeting, Jake found a letter slipped under his door. No signature. Just a single sentence. "The truth runs deeper than you know. Look closer." His curiosity flared. He revisited all the documents and footage with fresh eyes, searching for the hidden thread he'd missed. And then he saw it, a tiny detail in one of Karen's emails, a coded phrase referencing a name Jake hadn't connected before. Mason. Jake's blood ran cold. Mason was the quiet HOA treasurer, someone no one suspected. He had kept a low profile throughout the scandal, quietly deflecting questions and staying out of the spotlight. Jake dug deeper and uncovered financial records showing Mason had funneled money through shell companies linked to the construction firm. Worse, Mason had been manipulating records to cover up Karen's activities and protect the bigger conspiracy. The truth hit Jake like a thunderclap. Karen had been a pawn, manipulated by Mason all along. Her obsession, her actions, they had been fueled by his lies and false promises. Jake confronted Mason at the committee meeting, presenting the evidence. The room fell into stunned silence as Mason's mask crumbled. Faced with undeniable proof, Mason confessed. He'd orchestrated the corruption to gain control of Crestwood's future development and to silence anyone who opposed him, including Karen. The revelation shook Crestwood to its core, but it also brought relief. The true villain was exposed, and the community could finally begin to heal. Months later, with Mason behind bars and the HOA rebuilt from the ground up, Crestwood was changing for the better. Jake's pool was clean and clear once again, a symbol of resilience and renewal. One sunny afternoon, as children splashed happily in the water, Jake looked around at his neighbors, laughing, chatting, united. Emma squeezed his hand. "We did it." Jake smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. The fight had been long and painful, but it had forged something stronger than fear or hatred. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the neighborhood, Jake whispered to himself, "In every shadow, there's a spark of light." And in Crestwood, that spark was burning brighter than ever.